Welcome to Leadership Explored, the podcast where we dive into what it really means to lead in today's world. I'm Ed Schaefer, joined as always by my co-host Andy Siegmund. There's a phrase that gets thrown around in management circles a lot. Don't bring me problems, bring me solutions. The idea is that leaders shouldn't just state problems, it's raining or sales are down, that they should own the solution. But there is a real tension here, because sometimes accurate reporting is exactly what the organization needs to make a decision. And sometimes trying to own a problem without having the full context could make things worse. So today, we're exploring the difference between passive reporting and active recommendations. When is it okay to just point out the storm? And how do we move from pointing at problems to solving them without overstepping our authority? So Andy, let's start there, I guess. This was originally your idea that you'd brought to me. I guess start by just laying out what you view as the difference between a weather report and an action plan and some of your initial thoughts on it.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Ed. So this came out of some guidance that a manager had given me, years ago at this point, right? Which was that he was not interested in us simply reporting the weather, right? And this is something that I see pretty frequently, especially with younger or more junior employees when they're leading a project or when they're taking lead on an initiative and you ask them for updates. They do what I say, or what I would call reporting the weather, right? Which is just saying what's going on. It is raining today. And what I'm really looking for as I'm trying to get more, in depth with the projects in my broader portfolio, right? That the folks downstream of me are leading, or trying to get a better finger on the business is answers to a couple of questions, right? Which is so what and what now? And I think that we often leave that out of our reporting. And yeah, I think you'd asked, right? Is there a time and a place for reporting the weather? I think frequent high touch things, sometimes you are just saying all right, and then this is happening or this is happening, because that decision's out, what do you do about it is outside of your bounds. But as we'll talk about more as this conversation goes on, what I want to impress on people is think about next level concerns, right? Think about, it's raining out, so what do you need to do about that? What is that going to mean? Does that mean that you need to take more time for your commute? Does that mean that you need to grab an umbrella? Does that mean nothing because you're staying home all day, right? What is the impact of this? And stretch this weather metaphor as long as I possibly can. Um, and then also try to have a point of view on it too, right? And try to understand why this matters or what's going on and what it is in your report that your leadership team actually needs to know, right? So what now? So what? Why do I care? Those are the questions that you want to answer within your reporting. And then what's next? What are the risks, right? How can we mitigate those risks as much as we possibly can? And then if you have any requests for help, this is also the appropriate time to integrate those pieces into your coherent point of view.
Yeah. I was thinking about this from how you described it to me, and I guess I view it as it's there's a spectrum where there's reporting on one end of the spectrum, and then I guess in the middle, I would call it recommending. And then on the far end of the spectrum is owning the outcome. Because sometimes you are just reporting. Sometimes you're reporting, but it needs to come with something attached to it. And then sometimes you're making the decisions yourself. And, something you had mentioned, I would almost call it a bad weather report, which would be observation without the implication. So if somebody just
Mhm.
came to me and said the server is down, I don't, I have to do all of the thinking in that case. I have to figure out what that means and what we should do with it. And and for me, I'm probably going to wind up just asking a bunch of questions that if maybe they'd come, with, almost more of a good weather report. The types that I think of is, you wouldn't just say it's raining. You would say, you might say well, it's going to be raining because this storm system is coming in from the west, and the probability of it hitting your area is what 85% chance of rain over these couple of hours. And like with, with a real severe weather forecast, there's a weather forecaster I like who he says, don't be scared, be prepared. And so it's, maybe it's like, well, what preparation should we take to deal with this issue? And that would change the reporting from being kind of low value or bad reporting to a high value reporting. Um, so, I was thinking about
Yeah.
that. And then like the ownership gap, because when we take ownership, that's taking responsibility for the outcome. But if you can't own the outcome because you don't have authority, whether that's budget or context or something else, to make the decision or control something, then you might not want to go all the way to the owning side of things, because that might be outside of your scope. Or like in the case of a leader, you might not want your direct report to own the thing because you need to own it. They just need to bring you the information and the context to help you make a good decision.
Yeah, and I think it's also one of those things too, right? Like, how do you differentiate yourself as an individual? And like, look, sometimes you are just simply the messenger, right? I am here, I am carrying this message, I will deliver this message. I'm not involved, right? But oftentimes where people get hung up is they behave like the messenger or the weather reporter when they do have ownership, right? So if you're a project lead or a project manager and you're providing your updates, whether that's weekly or monthly or whatever that fixed cadence is, I find folks get caught really, really poorly in this trap where they're simply reporting the weather. They're just saying, this is what's going on. This happened, this happened, this happened, this happened. And there's no and then, or there's no so what, right? Or so that. So, right. So, what I really kind of want to impress on it is like, it should be the server went down and we are doing XYZ to remediate it. And the impact is going to be this. Here is my ask for you, leadership team, or this is what I need, or the server went down, we fixed it within the context of our SLA. We're doing a root cause analysis, as as is our policy. I expect that root cause analysis to be out on such and such date. As of right now, I don't have any anticipation that this is going to be something that repeats. I wanted y'all to be aware of this because this is a risk that we had not previously anticipated. Um, and we will know more when we finish our root cause analysis. But right now, I don't see how that's the story that I want, not just server went down. And I think a lot of folks get hung up on server went down. Like, I'm supposed to tell you the thing that happened without telling you like the whole plan, or without like having a real point of view, or showing you that I've got ownership of the situation.
Yeah. When I think about that, I do think there is a balance there that you need to communicate with your people to make sure they know what to do. Because I can think of a couple of times when I tried to own a decision because I thought I knew the right thing to do and I wanted to show some initiative, and the choices that we were making were the right choice for the team, or for the problem that we were facing, but it was the wrong decision for the project sponsor or for the context of the organization or for that VP, because of some other strategy or something else that they had going on, politics or budget constraints, that sort of a thing.
Mhm.
And so, I think, I don't know if other people have encountered that in their experience as well, where you try to own something and then, you almost feel like you get your hand slapped a little bit for like making the wrong decision. But I think sometimes I wonder if that's what encourages people to, um, avoid bringing the solutions. Because if you bring what you think is the solution and you're told no, that's not the way to approach it, then that could,
Mhm.
it may almost make you feel unsafe to make those decisions in the future. So I guess I'm curious what you think about that. Like, I feel like we hear a lot this idea of don't bring me problems, bring me solutions, and I've heard two or three viewpoints on that phrase and the idea of like don't bring me problems, bring me solutions. So I mean, what do you think about that? Does saying that actually work, or does that maybe encourage people to keep reporting without moving into that recommendation or even ownership context?
Yeah. So every time I hear that, I'm reminded of I think his name is John Taffer, the guy from Bar Rescue, which is the same as like the Gordon Ramsay kitchen rescue sorts of things, but he does it for bars. And his line I think is, "I don't embrace problems, I embrace solutions," but it's functionally the same thing. Um, it's kind of a BS line, in my opinion, right? So I think like my guidance for folks would be have strong convictions loosely held. So what do I mean by that? I mean, if I'm looking at my team and I'm evaluating or assessing my team and their capabilities, I want them to come to me with a point of view. I understand that they have limited context, right? So they have really deep context about what's going on in their particular engagements, right? In their neck of the woods, as Al Roker, the weatherman, used to describe things. But they might not have the same context for global things as I do, right? They might not necessarily have the same context into like the business impacts of things, or like the margins, or how our business might view a certain project, or they might be thinking concretely about what is best for the customer, and providing a recommendation for what is best for the customer that's not economically viable and is an investment that I'm unwilling to make for a customer of a certain size, right? Like at the end of the day, right, we run businesses, we should be thinking that context. But I still want them to come to me with convictions and with an idea and with reasoning to support that idea. But those ideas need to be loosely held, because you need to know that you don't know everything, right? So it's based on what I know. Our recommendation is to do XYZ, and we expect ABC as the results. And then you ask, is there anything else that I need to know that should be an input to these plannings, or is there anything else that I'm missing? And I think as a leader, like it's your job. Like sometimes you have to come in over top, but should not like steamroll your team. I should not come in and say, "Ed, what a stupid idea. You didn't know about this, this, this." Well, it's not your job to know about this, 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 and this, right? That's why we have different roles. So that's how I recommend people go about it. Um, yeah, I'm
Y-
curious your thoughts on
Yeah, I mean,
that from like an approach point of view.
I guess when I think about that phrase, "Don't bring me problems, bring me solutions," I guess I fundamentally agree with you. I almost think of it as a maybe it's like a good, better, best. So it's good to bring me problems, right? If you are
Mhm,
seeing problems and you aren't bringing them up, then that is a failure of something, whether that's my leadership or the safety in the organization or whatever. I wouldn't want someone to not. I think this is where I don't like that saying is, if you tell people don't bring me problems, bring me solutions, and I go, oh, I see this problem, but I don't have a solution. I don't know what to do about it. Maybe I shouldn't bring this problem up because they want solutions. All of a sudden, you might be having problems hidden that you don't even know about and can't do anything about. Right. So I think that's the danger in in this. So I think it's good to bring problems even if you don't have a solution. And then better
mhm,
would be bringing problems with a point of view or I mean, I do this sometimes where I'll say, I don't know what the right answer is for us or for this client or for this project or for this context, but here's a couple of the things I'm thinking about, and I'll lay out some possibilities or some considerations.
mhm,
Or well, we might need to seek extra project funding. I don't know if that's the right thing to do or not, or if we can allocate money some other way, but that's what comes to mind first for me. And that feels like that's better than just bringing the problem. And then best would be, ideally, I guess, if the people have enough ownership and context and knowledge and everything they need to be able to see a problem and then come up with a solution and propose it in a way that it is achievable or fits inside of the context of that company or that project or whatever. um, then that would be the best possible option, because then also, for me as a leader, I'm not making the decision and I get to empower my people to make the decision and like own those decisions
mhm.
as well. So I guess I kind of think of it as that sliding scale. Um,
Yeah, and I think that's fair, and I think what I'm getting at primarily is like start the problem solving exercise before that conversation, right? So like, yeah, I know we often talk about like escalate early, escalate often, but have done do the groundwork prior to that escalation, right? So that's kind of what we're getting at here is like if you're going to engage your leadership team, if you're going to go to your boss with a problem or with something that's giving you the heebie jeebies even, right? Like yes, I'm not saying don't escalate that, just saying think it through, right? Try to anticipate what kind of questions they're going to ask and have your answers figured out to those things, because there's nothing more frustrating than like that escalation call that happens too early because we just haven't gotten the data yet. Like
Hmm.
even if you're asking for a solution, like at least have the data available. And then I made this mistake recently too, right? Because I these things happen, right? You hate to see that from a seasoned pro. But this happens to us all the time, right? And these are the things that I encourage people to think about. Like think ahead, think about what's going to happen and have that point of view and understand, show that you understand the context that you're working in. um and part of this is like part of it's just like, do your darn job, but part of it is also if you want to position yourself to grow in an organization, you have to position yourself as somebody who's generative and somebody who solves problems. If you're somebody who just like points out problems, you're likely going to stagnate in the place there that you are, right? Like it's helpful. Not saying it's a bad thing to do, but the better thing to be able to do is to say, we have this problem, so I did this thing about it, or I'm going to do this thing about it.
Yeah. Well, so earlier you mentioned that a lot of people, you think that they sort of err on the side of reporting, or just providing status without maybe as much context or decisions or things like that. What do you think's behind that? I mean, there's a lot of smart, capable people who, I mean, it's been my experience too, where you would expect them to have a point of view or some perspective or options, but they come and they just list the problems and say this is happening and kind of do that weather reporting instead of moving more towards that ownership. So what do you think's behind that? Is it like lack of confidence, structural safety issue, something else entirely?
um yeah, and I think it's a handful of different things. So sometimes I think it's just psychological safety, right, within the context of an organization where people are afraid. Like if I share an opinion or I share a plan, I'm afraid it's not going to be the right one, and I might get reprimanded or chewed out for that, right? And I'll be blunt. If you work in an organization where you're afraid to share your ideas because if they're not perfect, you're going to get steamrolled. Like, go find somewhere else to work. Like, that's just not. You're not going to grow in an organization like that. You're not going to get the opportunities that you want in an organization like
And you're
that.
not
And
going to
and
change
uh,
them either.
you're not going to change them. And, as Thumper, the ski instructor, said on South Park, right? If you French fry when you're supposed to pizza, you're going to have a bad time. That's an organization where you're going to have a bad time.
Yeah.
Um, some of it, I think some people, and this is not a jab at anyone from an individual level. I think some people just don't want that authority. They don't want that ownership. They don't want that responsibility. And that's fine. But understand that that's going to lower your ceiling significantly if
That'll
you're
be a
not willing
limiter for sure.
to take full ownership. And I would encourage folks like that who are like, I'm not sure if I really want to have to do this, to think about what it is that they really want out of their career longer term. Not saying that everyone needs to be, pining for the C-suite or anything like that, right? We all kind of find our ceilings and you know, uh, eventually come to grips with that. But if your ceiling is involves not taking ownership of projects or of outcomes, you're going to be pretty limited, broadly speaking. And then The last, I think, is just an enablement and a skills gap. And in my opinion, that's totally fine, right? As a people manager, if I don't understand where the boundaries of your skills are, I can't help you improve them. Um, some folks are like often, afraid to seem dumb, right? Or seem foolish, right? I think it's a Seneca line, right? Which is a man cannot learn that which he thinks he already knows, right? So you might have a little bit of that going on. But like realistically, when I'm looking at my teams and the teams I've led, leading currently or have led in the past, one of the big assets I look for in folks is what I would call learning agility, right? So just ability to learn from your mistakes and not reproduce them in the future, right? So when anyone comes on my team, one of the first things I tell them is like, look, within reason, I'm wholly unconcerned with mistakes. And look, if your mistake is wide and big enough in scale, like I'm concerned with it, because obviously at the levels we're talking about, you shouldn't be making $1 million mistakes probably, right? But like $100 mistakes, I don't really care about. What I care about is you not reproducing those mistakes or you learning something from that mistake. And I would encourage anyone out there who's listening, who's thinking about like their current spot in their career and their growth trajectory, make sure that you're finding managers who are willing to teach and who are willing to help you upskill and who are willing to provide feedback so that you can do that, because that's going to be the biggest career accelerator for you overall.
Yeah. I think those are great points. When I was thinking about this, I kind of tried to take a little bit of a different viewpoint on it and think about, I guess, putting on my coaching hat, what would make it okay, right? Because
Mm,
like we hear that whole "don't bring me problems, bring me solutions," and people say, "Oh, my team, they just bring me problems and they don't bring me solutions, or they don't own the issue or whatever." So I tried to think about why this might be happening, but from a why is it okay that it might be happening? So I'm
mm,
curious what you think about some of these things. So the first one I was thinking about was around authority. If someone is in a position where they don't have budget or decision rights or enough context or whatever, then it might be above their pay grade, in which case it's above my pay grade is a valid defense. I know sometimes people will use that as an excuse
mhm.
to get out of doing something, but I mean, for a lot of people, a lot of individual contributors, they don't have enough context or information to necessarily make decisions. So that was something I was thinking about, was like it might actually
Yeah.
be above your pay grade.
Oh, wholly. And I think one caveat here, Ed, is like I'm not advocating for swashbuckling,
Oh, sure.
one of our former shared managers would call it. What I'm advocating for is like, look, things are above my pay grade too. What I'm advocating for is like when you see a problem, you report the problem and you report an opinion or a recommendation associated with that problem. And like sometimes it's when you're like, sometimes the way you report that is like, we have problem XYZ. I intend to do ABC. And what you're looking for is don't do that. And if you don't hear don't do that, that's a green light. Other times things are above your pay grade and you're like, we are having XYZ problem. My recommendation is ABC. And you send that up to the leadership gods and you see what they come back with because it's truly above your pay grade. And like all you can really do is ship that up and they might come back with questions. They might greenlight it. They might say, actually, we're going to go in this direction. And if it's a pivot from your recommendation, politely ask, what was it that I didn't know that resulted in this change? Like try to understand how you could have made that recommendation before they made that recommendation. Like what is the information gap or what wasn't I thinking about?
Yeah.
So yeah, but yeah, you're wholly right. Like above my pay grade is legit, and yeah, oftentimes it's because when the decision changes, it's because there's something that above your pay grade knows that you don't know, um, or that they get paid to think about that you hadn't thought about yet.
Hmm. Yeah, so that was one. Another one I was thinking about, and I've experienced this myself, and I've talked to folks who've experienced this too, where, um, I guess kind of your experience starts to add up, right? So maybe something happened and you didn't act, and maybe you got feedback, let's call it constructive feedback, or maybe it was even negative feedback that, like, oh, you should have taken more initiative on this thing. Um, and but then maybe there was another situation where you did act. You were like, okay, they told me to take more initiative, so now I acted, but then you did something wrong or that didn't meet company expectations, or it broke something or whatever, and now you get negative feedback as a result of that. So now it's like, well, maybe I shouldn't act because there was a negative repercussion to me acting last time. And I've also, like, I guess on a similar note, or kind of a flip side of this, is sometimes I've seen where um, where I'm trying to report, or someone I know is trying to report information as early as possible because they see a risk, or there's something that's coming up that's going to be happening with it, but they don't have maybe all of the context or all of the knowledge. And you get pushback sometimes on those things where it's like, well, you didn't need to escalate this yet. Or I've even had where I try to provide the context and you get a, like, that was way too much information that we didn't need for this. And so, it almost feels like you tried to do the right thing and you wound up annoying somebody. And so I think that just finding that middle ground is really difficult sometimes, and
Mm.
I think that will sometimes hold people back and prevent them from moving towards the action plan or the recommendations, and just stick with the reporting because it winds up being safer. Does that resonate with you at all? And what do you think about that?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that that's unfortunately way too common. Um, you
Yeah.
know, and and again, I think like there are some tools that we can use to help alleviate some of that. So like one of the reporting mechanisms I use is a 2 by 2 matrix that's space constrained, and is font constrained as well. So you have a limited amount of space to provide all of your reporting. So you have to make high judgment calls as far as what is the most important thing for me to roll up. And then there's the option for commentary on it as well, right? Because it's just a Word document. And oftentimes my comments are, sometimes they're literally, so what? What now? Other times, actually, I would say 70% of the time that I comment on 100% of these for my teams. I would say about 70% of them involve me saying, how can I help? Right? Because you're bringing something to me that's important, and you're starting a conversation, not finishing a conversation. And that's something I think is important too, right? Is understand that with any of these sorts of things, you're not going to close the whole loop,
Hmm.
right? The point is to start the conversation and open the door, and it's to show that you like it's if we're talking about we've been talking a lot about escalations, right? So let's just keep on that context. If you're talking about something in the context of an escalation, the idea should be like, you know that you're not going to solve the problem today. It's to identify the problem, identify the next couple of steps, and confirm that you're on the right path, right? And the more steps you can identify, the better, broadly speaking. If you can only identify the problem, that should generally be okay, but acknowledge like, hey, like we have this thing, not really sure where we go from here, and try to be transparent with the team that you're escalating to as to like, if that's because we just discovered this an hour ago and we haven't had a chance to meet and we'll know more in XYZ time, or if you're in front of your skis and like this is you raising the flag of like, hey, I need help right now. Try to differentiate between those things. Because some of this too is also learning how to manage your boss or learning how to manage your leadership team, and like having led, you know, more than my fair share of teams at this point. What I'm looking for from most of my folks is some sort of vote of confidence from them that they've got it broadly under control. And if they don't, if I like don't get that indication, I'm probably going to come in over top, and I'm probably going to knock you out of the room, and I'm just going to solve the problem myself because it's going to be easier for me that way. And my job is to solve the problem. Right. Which is bad for everyone involved because you lose a learning opportunity. I lose some trust in you. You lose ownership over something. And now I have to do more stuff. And I'm going to be like, well, I have to do this because Ed can't do his job.
Hmm.
Right. And that might not be like, more often than not, that's not true. Like you probably got that job because you're good at what you do, but you gave me the wrong signals, right? You gave me signals that you don't have it under control because you didn't at least start like looking down the path as far as what's next. Like you just kind of, you gave me the weather report and then gave me nothing else. And now I have to do all of the probing, as opposed to you showing up and saying, hey, I've thought this out. I've got some ideas. I'd like your feedback on these ideas.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point. Even though sometimes people's job is to be the sensor, and if you think about it, like if you're the nerve ending in your hand and you put it on a hot stove, the nerve ending, all it's doing is telling your brain that the hand is burning, but that nerve ending isn't what pulls the hand away, it's your brain. But you need to
Right.
send a clear enough signal so that the brain can pull the hand away. And I think that kind of lines up with what you're describing here as well, is like, you need to, as an individual, you need to figure out how you can communicate in a way that you're giving enough information, even if you don't have all the full context or decision making or whatever to help that decision be made. You'd need that signal to be as clear as possible so that the person who's in the right position to make that decision can do it and take some action out of what's coming out. And you can't, if I'm working on a project at the project level with a client, and I have a manager or director or someone who's overseeing a whole portfolio of projects, they obviously can't know all of the details of what's going on from day to day.
Mhm.
They're focused at a different level. So the people who are at that lower, closer level to the work need to be able to communicate that up to make sure those signals are clear.
Yeah. And like, I've got a good context right now where in the next day or so, I will report a signal for which I have no ownership. It's above my pay grade, but I need to report the signal, right? And what it comes down to is we have an offering that has changed a couple of times in the trailing 6 months or so. And the boots on the ground don't know where that's going, if we're going to retain that offering, if we're going to change that offering in a significant way. And that could potentially impact renewals, it impacts conversations with customers, etc. I am not the one who is working on revising this offering. In fact, I don't really know what's going on with it. I know that it's in flight, but I now know that it's starting to impact things that are happening at the ground. So that's a signal that I need to report. And the way I'm going to frame it with my leadership team is like, hey, I was in my team meeting the other day, and this came up as something that's causing some strife. It would be awesome if I could get any sort of updates that I could run, yeah, back down to the boots on the ground, or even a date for a date on when this is going to happen, so that I can allay some fears, right? And that's how you have that conversation, right? Is if
Hmm.
you're just the messenger, be really upfront that I am just the messenger. I have no control here, right? That way, it's the message remains super duper clear.
Yeah, I think that's great. And this, something that's got me thinking about. So, I think we should be moving into kind of solutions and approaches to deal with this. But something that I didn't have in my notes for this episode, but as we were talking, it made me think of this is L. David Marquet and his intention-based leadership, and
I intend.
yeah, well, and that's like level 5. So, I think that would be the first thing that you could do as a leader is figure out where you are on this autonomy versus mastery and purpose kind of scale that intention-based leadership talks about. And so at the bottom, and then we might need to do a whole episode on this in the future, but at the very bottom of this is um, uh, the manager or leader saying, "I'll tell you what to do," and the individual contributor, let's just call it, saying, "Tell me what to do." And then if you move up a layer from that, it's "What do you think?" is the question that I as a leader would be asking, and they would say, "I think." And the level up from that would be, "What do you recommend?" And they could say, "I recommend this." And the level above that is, "What do you request permission to do?" And they would say, "I request permission for X." But then once you cross above that level and you get into the fifth, sixth, and seventh levels, it kind of shifts. So instead of the leader asking, I mean, the leader may still need to ask to encourage the right behavior, but it moves up to, "What do you intend to do?" And then the person can say, "I intend to X." And in some cases, when you get to that "I intend to," it may no longer even be a "What do you intend to do?" question. You may have already, you hopefully have built up a situation where they know they can just come to you and say, "I intend to do X." And then that way, as the leader, if you see some reason they shouldn't do that thing, you can stop them. But otherwise, it's just a, cool, proceed, carry on, and you're good to go. And then if you can keep moving above that, it moves into, "Tell me what you've done, and I've already done this thing," so that you're no longer
Mhm.
asking for permission, whether it's tacit or otherwise. Before then, you're doing the thing, and then the top level would be, "Tell me what you've been doing." "Oh, I've been doing this." So it's even a little bit further removed from the action to the outcome, where you're earlier on you have to tell them what to do, so you're basically telling them the action before they even start the outcome, and by the time you get to the top of this ladder, they've already done the thing and they're just informing you of what's been going on. So I think approaching it that way, figuring out where you are currently along this continuum, and then seeing what you can do to move up to the next level, and hopefully getting into that "I intend to." Um, in a lot of cases, that won't be possible for everything. Like every situation we've talked about, they may not be able to say "I intend to,"
Mhm.
but you could easily get to the "I recommend," and having that be a pretty common thing. Maybe "I think," if it's hard for them to make recommendations for whatever reason, that'd be a little bit lower, but it would be moving you up. But yeah, if you can get up into that "I intend to," then I think there's a lot more safety there for people.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that that makes a lot of sense. And I think it also, like, a lot of it is context dependent too, right? So some things, the broader scale the change, or the broader scale the outcome that you're looking to accomplish, usually the less authority you as an individual are going to have to do that, unless you're pretty high up in a company. But a lot of things too, like, if you can identify, so we've talked about this, right? I work in a professional services context, right? So think consulting. Um, and making broad changes for clients usually requires, higher levels of approval, right? We're talking budgets, we're talking outcomes, we're talking large impacts. But finding problems within our workflow or our delivery methodology, generally speaking, if you come to me and you say, "Hey, our budget tracker is garbage and it doesn't have these features," and let's just say hypothetically it's an Excel spreadsheet that we just share and recycle, right? As is often tradition for these sorts of things, my response is going to be, "Great, fix it." So you're better off just saying, "Hey, I found this problem and I solved this problem," because you're going to earn a ton of credibility with your leadership team. And there's all these, like, small things in pretty much everyone's context where you can, like, if you kind of aim yourself at making life easier, like, what would make life easier for myself if I spent an hour on this? Would it save me time over the next week, month, year? Great. Can I scale it and share it? Great. You know who's my new teacher's pet? That person, right? The person who takes that initiative rather than saying, "Hey, Mr. Boss Man, this thing stinks." Okay, can you do anything about it? If you can, just do something about it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because if you are only reporting, then as we said, you're a sensor, but that also means you're replaceable
Mhm,
because anyone could come in and just point out problems and not do anything about them. That's something we're all very good at is pointing out problems. And if you sometimes if you act without context, you might be a liability. So there is also
mhm,
some concerns there potentially with acting and what the context is and whether it's safe to act or not, or whether you have enough information to. So I think as I was thinking about this, how to kind of bridge those two disparate sort of ends of this, I think what I would recommend is probably I guess what I'll call like a recommendation bridge. I'm not sure if there's a better
mhm,
name for this, but I don't really like calling them action plans. I think action plans a lot of times sound final or like they're definitive or decisive, and I don't think that that's always the case. So I think there is some risk in that unless we are to the point of like these are our defined next steps. We're putting this together as an action plan to like document it and collect it. So I think telling people don't give me weather reports, give me action plans, I think would be a dangerous change to make. But I think if you can move more towards recommendations, that sounds a lot more collaborative. And if you give me a recommendation, I can either take it or leave it. And you're acknowledging that not all recommendations are have full context or full insights or full information. And so I
mhm,
think I think if you start kind of talking about things like if you see a problem, I'd love for you to bring me the problem and any of your recommendations. I think that opens it up for people, and it feels um, like you're committing to less, or it could be less scary than if you said, "And bring me an action plan." And then I think if you were to, as a leader, if you set expectations with your contributors to um, kind of the formula that I was coming up with was if you can give me the observation, the implication of that observation, like what does it mean or what would be the fallout from this, whether it's good or bad, and then maybe three options with your recommendation. Then that helps me make better decisions. And I know I've done this relatively recently where I said, this is what problem we're facing and what's happening. This is what this means for the health of this project and for the timeline and budget and the deliverables. Here are what I see as the potential options. And I said, I may not have all of the options. So if there's any that I'm missing or I didn't think of, I would love to know what those options are. And then I said, I think based on the information I have, I recommend this one. And recently I made that thing and it was everything went well, but what came back was, I don't like that as the solution. I think I'd rather go with this other option. And there was no I didn't feel bad that I picked that my recommendation was
yeah,
the wrong option because I wasn't making the final decision. I was just providing enough information and context and background to help the person who could make the decision make the best decision. And so I think that helped. In that case, it helped that leader make understand the context and validate the context before any sort of action was taken. Where if I'd taken the action without bringing it up, then we might have been going down the wrong path.
yeah, yeah, and I think that that's really good guidance, Ed. And I like the producing of optionality, and a lot of it is like it's it's part of that ownership is taking on the burden of thinking it through.
Yeah. Well, so to that end, I mean, if you have a team member who is good at spotting problems, but they tend to err on the side of weather reporting and they don't suggest answers or next steps, how do you coach them to take that next step and do it in a way that makes them feel safe?
Yeah. So one of the things I've found to be most useful, and this isn't just for like the weather reporting challenge, but this is just broad as like a leadership stance overall, is be boringly consistent. And in this context, that means there's 3 or 4 questions that I'm going to ask every single darn time. And if you're like, if you, so we had, I worked for somebody years ago who was like wildly unpredictable. So you get into an escalation call or a status call or whatever, and you'd have a game plan, right? As we all do. And calls with him were like that Mike Tyson line, right? Of like everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face, and like you just like walk into the room and like your plan would go out the window. And it made people stop having plans because you're just like, well, what's the point? Like, I don't know, like this call might go according to the plan that I want it to. I might get to lead it, or I might just get like, yeah, spend the whole call getting peppered with questions about like whatever this person wants to talk about. And that makes for a really anxious organization, makes things really, really tough. As a leader, I'm not saying you can script out everything, but the more predictable that you can be, the better prepared your team is going to be for the things that you really care about, and the better those conversations are going to be, and the more direct and driven they're going to be, right? So like we do these, like for our strategic accounts, we do these periodic calls with our entire executive leadership team. And I know that when it comes to the financials and growth plans and whatnot, that one person on the financial team is going to reference the most recent 10Q or 10K for that client, assuming that they are publicly traded. So if you haven't read it, or at least asked Gemini or Chat GPT, what are the highlight reels? How much money did this client make in the last quarter? You're not prepared for that meeting, and you know that that question is coming every time. So as a leader, I think it's like, be consistent about those things, right? So like when I'm teaching folks to not just report the weather, I'm going to ask them, so what now? Why do I care? Right? Or some version of those questions. And anyone who's worth retaining is going to figure that out after a couple of reps. Like, oh, Andy is looking for these sorts of things, so they're going to start folding those answers in, or they're at least going to come into the conversation with those answers pre-prepared if they're not explicitly in the report. And then if they don't, after a handful of reps, then you might need to have a blunt conversation of like, hey, look, Ed, every time we get here, you show up with a weather report. I ask these 4 questions and you look at me with glossed over eyes like, what's up, dude?
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. And that lines up with, I had put together three, um, I guess 3 pieces of guidance for folks that are out there listening, whether this is something you need to apply to yourself or whether these are things that you might want to use with your team to help encourage this. So the first one is very similar to what you just described, although mine's from more of the, I think from the coaching background and standpoint, which is the so what rule. So whenever you're working on an update or checking on something and you're wondering if you've explained the implication and that you're not just trying to share the data and what it means, you can use this coaching tool, which is what, so what, now what. And so you could use this for yourself when you're sending something like, what is the problem? So what? Why does it matter? Why does anyone care? And then now what? What might be the next steps or what needs to happen to resolve this going forward? And I think applying that to yourself or teaching your teams to use this thought process, even if this is just a lightweight template that, hey, if you're going to send me, some new issue or risk that's been identified, if you could just format it in this simple what, so what, now what, that would probably be a really good way to get your team started into owning things a little bit more and moving towards more recommendations. And then I think, using that recommendations language, like instead of saying, well, what's your plan? What's going to happen next? Instead, if you say, well, what's your recommendation? And if you encourage people, like if you're bringing a problem up and raising it, attach a proposed approach And like you said earlier, that's going to signal initiative, but it also opens it up for feedback and correction. And if I'm the person who's putting together a recommendation as opposed to, or a proposed approach as opposed to a plan, um, I also am not as nervous about feedback or correction, right? Because if I'm putting all my efforts into this action plan to say all the next steps and somebody tears it apart, I might feel bad about the amount of work I put in. But when it's a recommendation or a proposal, that's all that it is, right? Just what I recommend based on the information I have right now, or what I might propose that we do. So I think even just that minor language shift can change things. And the third idea I had is to make sure that you define the boundaries, define the sandbox, and as a leader, make sure that you are clear to your team where the ownership line is. So saying, you own these aspects, I own these aspects. Like maybe you own the schedule and I own the budget. So if there's schedule decisions, you make them. You don't have to come to me and raise them. But if it's a budget decision, then we do need to discuss it. And having something defined like that, where you have clarity up front, then that can reduce fear and concerns of doing the wrong thing, or encourage people um, to make sure that they're taking the right steps. And one of the tools I really like for doing this is Management 3.0. They have the delegation poker, where it goes. I mean, it's very similar to what we talked about with L. David Marquet, but it goes from tell on one end all the way up to I think it's advise on the other end. So, on one end as the manager, I'm telling you, maybe I'm telling you what bonuses are going to be for this year. But on the other side, the team might fully decide, their working hours, or their hours of overlap, or when their stand up is, or things like that. And so I don't need to be involved in those decisions. And if you use a tool like delegation poker up front, then you can manage some of those expectations, and people can already know where they should be trying to make decisions, where maybe they're just making recommendations, or where they should just sit back and all they need to do is report the information because the decisions are out of their hand. So those are some that I thought of. Anything else that you'd want to share with our listeners that they could take away and apply that might help them, get this reporting versus owning thing more dialed in their own organizations?
Yeah, and I think I just want to hammer down on the recommendations piece, right? Because both as a leader and as somebody who's reporting, recommendations allows you to have high convictions loosely held, right? It gives you an off ramp, right? A plan gives the implication that, like, this is what we're going to do come, yeah, hell or high water. Recommendations says, this is what I feel strongly is the correct way to know or to go. It allows you to acknowledge that you might not have the whole of context, and allows you to kind of take all that David Marquet piece of, like, this is what I intend to do, right? Well, basically, what, like, I've even framed it as, like, look, knowing what I know, if you said, what am I going to do? This would be my answer. I am having this conversation with you because I don't know what I don't know. Right. So it gives you that out. And when you ask somebody for a recommendation, you don't have to follow it too, right? I can ask you for a restaurant recommendation, and you don't know my tastes. You don't know my dietary concerns. You might make a recommendation, and it's not, like, if I did not give you enough context of, like, I'm looking for a fine dining restaurant with a great wine list, do you have a recommendation? You might give me a, yeah, cheap eats pizza place, which could be a great recommendation, but it's not what I'm looking for, right? So, like, there's a wide range. But it allows you to, like, I can say, oh, that place sounds awesome, but dot dot dot, and it gives you that out. So I think that to me is one of the biggest takeaways.
Awesome. I think that's a great place to wrap up for today. There is a big difference between being a passive observer and an active partner. Leaders, if you want your team to just stop reporting the weather, you have to give them the safety to forecast the future and suggest how to prepare for it. So here's your challenge this week. Reflect on how you communicate up. Are you just handing off data and waiting for instructions, or are you using your knowledge and context to offer a recommendation? You don't have to have the perfect answer, but you should always have a point of view on the next step. How about how you communicate down? Is it safe for your team to bring problems? Is it safe for them to bring recommendations? Or do you expect them to have all of the answers and figure everything out? If so, you might be sending signals that tell them they should not be communicating as clearly with you, and that could be contributing to some of your problems. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Email us at leadershipexplored@gmail.com or connect with us on LinkedIn. Thanks for exploring leadership with us today. We release new episodes every other Tuesday. Until next time, keep leading with purpose.